So right away, we will be going into the next panel, which is creating Africa's green energy value chain. And to join us on the stage is Margret, Head of Regional Program Energy Security and Climate Change in Sub-Saharan Africa, Conrad Steve Tong. Please give her a round of applause as she comes on stage. And next is Dr. Abubaker Abbas, Senior Energy Forecast Analyst in Energy Economics and Forecasting Department of the GECF. Thank you, Mr. Abbas, for joining us. And we have Jean-Louis Kindler, the CEO for Waze 2H. And also joining us here is Laurent Coche, Green Hydrogen CEO. Thank you. And also we have Melissa Sikwila, the Chief Vice President of Project Development and Strategy of Genesis Energy. And we have Lady Margret Mutschler, the Vice President of Global Project Development of CWP Global, as our moderator. Thank you, Margret. I've lost 3.
Lost.
Okay, hello. Okay, that's my German nature. We're already late and then we have music, but you have got beautiful music. Good afternoon. On behalf of organizers, apologies for starting late. And as we have learned in green hydrogen, you need to be adaptable and flexible. So I'm keeping the seat warm for Joyce, which will take over the moderator. She's stuck on the other side of town in the Century City, and she's making her way through here. So if you see a swap later today or later in the session, I'm agreed with her that I will start a session, but I need to be on a panel on the other side of the road. And Joyce will then take over. Joyce Kabu, Africa Manager, Green Hydrogen Organization. Much more capable hands than what I have. Good afternoon, gentlemen and lady. And I see we're equally divided, so this is no manual. Congratulations to the organizers for attending to that. The topic of today is the International Energy Agency predicts that Africa is capable of producing up to 5,000 megatons of green hydrogen a year, with an electrolyzer pipeline of 114 gigawatt. Sometimes I wonder, we use giga so easily nowadays. Do we really know how many zeros is behind it? Announced for the continent, Africa's economies are poised for prosperity as green hydrogen serves as a catalyst for growth. I'm coming from Namibia, and I can tell you one thing. And in Namibia, we really look towards the establishment of the green hydrogen industry to diversify our export basket and take industrialization and our vision that we had for industrialization forward. And it's no different in any of the other countries where CWP is working in and where my colleagues were coming from or working in. So the questions that we are going to ask the panel to address and share their views and their wisdom with you is the following. And the way we're going to ask a question and allow each of the panel members to respond. Please keep your responses concise. And if you really don't have anything to say on the specific question, just pass. It's also okay. Okay? You don't need to have an opinion on anything. We're going to work through the questions, and then afterwards we will give you as the audience a session, not only to ask questions, but to share what you think, to opinionate about what you think. And that way, I think the session is for an hour, so I think that way we could have a useful discussion for an hour. And sorry, that's my mobile phone dropping. And I need to keep it with me because they let me know when to start on the other side. Okay, let's start. Are you brave enough to start, ma'am? Okay. What strategic steps? Let's do it this way. I'll ask the question, you volunteer, each one of you. Then I don't need to put anybody on the spot. Is that fine?
That's fine.
What strategic steps do you believe to enhance Pan-African collaboration and regional integration within the green hydrogen sector is needed? What strategic steps do you believe is needed to enhance Pan-African collaboration and regional integration within the green hydrogen section? We had, and let me help them to give you, I'm giving you 10 seconds to think. We have the Africa Climate Summit. How many of you have been at the Africa Climate Summit? Raise your hands. None. Okay. The Africa Climate Summit next year is an absolute must on your agenda. The first one took place in Kenya. One of the topics in the Africa Climate Summit was, as African Union, as Africans, we need to think as African unions. We need to collaborate as African units, whether it's on standardization, whether it is on putting in and lobbying and put together capital to put our own skin in the game, whether it is on valorization, whether it is deciding or agreeing what part of valorization will happen in what sectors and in what sections. There's a desperate need for Africans to work together on this and not just being village-minded about the development of this green hydrogen industry. Now I've given you the floor. Who of you would like to take this?
Yes, okay, happy to go on. Sorry, just checking the mic. Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity. In my understanding, based on the hydrogen prospect I've been working on for the last 5 years, the regional strategy for African hydrogen economic growth is heavily going to rely on the same success stories we have followed for natural gas. So obviously, because hydrogen is a gas, and it can be liquefied, it can be transported in a different way. So the market system for hydrogen, in terms of strategy, in terms of growth, in terms of regional collaboration, is meant to follow that same approach of that has happened in the gas sector. And if I can say it, is going to be 3 things. Now, the first and most important thing is to identify. In Africa, we have 2 potentials for hydrogen. Hydrogen for export and equally hydrogen for our own use. Now, when it comes to export, and I can give you this in a more holistic perspective based on gas exporting countries' forecast, hydrogen market is going to grow globally from the current 95 million tons to nearly 279 million tons by 2050. Obviously, somebody will say this is a long term, but what is key there is Africa is going to be a huge market as a producer. Why? Because if you are producing green hydrogen, you require renewables. And that renewable is nothing more than solar, and Africa has one of the highest solar intensity on the planet. So that is a plus. The second part is wind, even though Africa doesn't have that lucrative wind speed, but the power is going to be very important. So that is the most important thing. So first, Africa is going to learn to collaborate in terms of the production. Particularly, we have seen what has happened in Egypt, Mauritania, and many other African countries that are trying to scale up the green hydrogen. But it's equally important to understand that even countries that intend to produce green hydrogen cannot do it alone as a green. So they require some sort of push from the blue hydrogen, which is coming from mainly natural gas and oil. And that should be some sort of lever or as a starting point. If we do look at the economics at the moment, it's much more cheaper to produce blue than the green. So obviously, as African technology evolves, we may have to combine some sort of green and blue production gradually, and then countries, based on their regional positions, they can decide to strategically go for green or blue. And the third important point is in terms of the investment. And that investment, very glad to see it coming all over the world to Africa, which is a good opportunity. But one thing that we must learn to do in Africa is particularly building capacity. I wonder if there are African universities offering courses to students on hydrogen. And that is really a way to start, encouraging our younger people to learn, to know, and to understand how are they going to shape this large and growing future market for hydrogen. Let me pause there for now.
Thank you very much. Very well thought through. And I want to tie up to what you said, 2 points. The one is, I was just learned this morning that the university I attended actually now have a hydrogen chair, and planning for 2 hydrogen chairs. So it's coming. It's getting there. Yeah. But the other thing that you've mentioned, blue versus green, and in fact, amount of carbon for any kilogram of hydrogen produced. If we look at the strategies that we need as Africa to align on standardization, align on regulation, and given that we are having our own sphere, our own countries, our own problems, our own specific issues and challenges, what would you recommend are these strategies that we need to follow in order to try and at least get some sort of common ground in terms of regulation, standardization, and requirements for certification, vis-a-vis this what the end, we becoming the supplier, vis-a-vis what the off-takers would need from us?
I think we also, the question is the right entry point regional, continental, or is it actually in country? Because ultimately we're talking about an industry which, this was what one of the gentlemen on the previous panel was saying. We talk about something that actually hasn't happened. There are no hydrogen projects on the ground producing. I think we're still grappling with issues around technologies, financing, and so many other things. I think, we work in different companies, but we work in countries together, and we, I think, all understand that in order for African countries to benefit and create and extract the most value of these projects, there's a lot of work that needs to happen in terms of capacity building, attracting financing. I think we're all aware that Africa historically, for a number of reasons, has maybe not been as successful in attracting the most competitive financing. That's for multi-billion-dollar projects. That's a big challenge. So I guess I would kind of try and look at it differently and say, let's focus on, you've mentioned Mauritania, Namibia, Egypt. Let's focus on getting a few projects off the ground. And until recently, everybody was mentioning gigawatts. I think there is a realization when you attend conferences that megawatts is probably a good way to start. 10, 50, 100. Get learnings, validate a number of what policy frameworks make sense, what regulatory frameworks make sense, and then from that on, build a regional framework if it's relevant. Because otherwise what we end up doing is we spend years working on strategies, and then the opportunity is just gone. And then it's, what's the next one?
I want to echo this, Laurent, and because this morning somebody asked me exactly that question and say, there's a need for policy clarity, but at the same time you're developing projects. How does it work? And how does it work? Well, how do you think it works?
I think, and again, this was a word that was used by one of the panelists, I think partnership, because there's a lot of unknowns for investors, financing, technology, there's a lot of unknowns for governments. Typically, what you see, one of the common misunderstandings is that hydrogen is like oil and gas, but actually it's not. It is physically, it's a gas, but you're looking at long-term infrastructure projects versus oil and gas, which is much higher project returns. The regulatory framework that you need for one doesn't apply to the other. But we don't really know what is the most beneficial regulatory framework. So being transparent when you enter into a partnership with a government, saying, look, let's work together on a small-scale project to figure out what is the best tax regime, what are the best incentives, and this is where also DFIs and development partners have a huge role to play, because they can be the arbitrator, or they can be they can offer the platform for private sector and governments to come together and try and figure out how do we make this work. And the truth is, it's likely that early days projects, like the one we're working on in Mauritania, made it incentives in a phase one that may not be needed for subsequent phases post 2030. So that's what we have to be smart at, at creating that, because again, it's nascent and there are challenges on all fronts.
Absolutely. And it is all about partnership, isn't it? Because the only thing we know today is that we don't know how it's going to pan out. We're working in a market where technology is expected to come down. It's expected to become more effective. We're working on we always say we've got 6 horses, all untamed, young and not yet broken in. And at some stage, in the very soon future, they need to actually pull in synchronization a carriage going forward. Yet they are still running around in the pastures. This is how we sometimes feel, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think again, to me, that's been, over the last 12 months, the major change that I've, noticed in how people look at the industry is a year ago, anything below a gigawatt was not worth mentioning, and I think there is a realization that there is huge value for every partner to create out of an initial 20 megawatt phase.
Fantastic. I want to come back to the resources. So we have these ambitious targets, and as I said, we're talking about gigawatts. And can I come to you, ma'am? How would Africa countries secure this necessary resources, and this is human resources, as well as investment for these ambitious projects that we are tackling? What would be your advice?
Well, thank you for that. I would like to just go back, if you allow me, just to answer the first question, because I think my colleagues on the stage gave really great answers to that. But I'd like to add my voice to that to say, I believe we need a multi-pronged approach to this. Yes, we need to start the smaller projects, but if we don't have the enabling environment for those projects, if there are no policies in place, then those projects, as developers ourselves, will face a bottleneck. Now, I do want to say Africa has already started with the African Green Hydrogen Alliance, where we have about 6 African countries on there. I think we need a virtual as well as a horizontal integration. Not only policy from a government perspective, but also bringing in the private players, bring in the developers into the room, bring in the off-takers into the room, so we can actually make a robust ecosystem. I think we're positioned, like my colleague said, to be a net exporter of hydrogen. And that depends on how well we lay the foundation. So I believe we need to do that in a very multi-pronged approach as it pertains to strategies. Now, as it pertains to resources, if I just answer your question, I think everyone knows Africa's endowed with a lot of resources. That is the solar, the wind to an extent, as well as hydro. I believe, but for hydrogen to make sense, we still need to put in significant amounts of solar power plants or hydro power plants to be able to put in the inputs for hydrogen. Now, you can't do that as Namibia alone, nor can you do that as South Africa alone. We have to, and I emphasize on this, we have to partner and see ourselves as an exporter, as a grid, as a regional grid that exports. And therefore, we have to leverage into each other. The South African power pool is a very great example of how we've tried to do that. We need to do that for hydrogen as well. As it pertains to financing, I mean, that's always been the challenge, right, with financing in Africa. It's a high-risk continent. It's a high-risk continent. The financing is always very, very expensive. So that's always been the challenge. But again, if we bring in the financiers into the room early on, if we bring in the DFIs into the room early on, you're able to then see where the development is going. They're able to then share what it means and what are the factors to make your projects bankable. And then we waste a lot less time trying to reach commercial and financial close if we bring in all of the players early on.
Thank you very much. And I want to introduce you to Joyce. Joyce, and I hope I pronounce your surname, is Kabu. Yeah? Is it Kabu? Yeah. She's the African Manic Green Hydrogen Organization, and she is actually your moderator. I was just keeping the seat warm for him. Joyce, we covered standardization, we've covered regulation. We need to cover the risk of cost of capital going forward. And if you will excuse me, it was lovely and I would love to stay there, but I need to run to the other panel, otherwise my country will never forgive me and evoke my passport. Thank you very much, Joyce.
Thank you for getting us started. Thank you very much. My apologies for running late. I was at the Green Hydrogen Summit at Central City. So we will get this going and combine the two conversations because they're both very important and interesting, and it's a pleasure to meet you, my panelists. So we're getting on to the risk of capital, and I will start with a conversation that James Munyupe challenged us yesterday on a panel, that financing and how we are really, projects are going to get to FID. And this is because, are we talking to the banks? We are talking to DFIs a lot, and I just probably wanted to start with Laurent from Chariot. In terms of projects you have in Mauritania and financing, what are you seeing as some of these questions we should be asking the banks to make sure that these projects will be financed effectively in coming years?
So I think one is, what we were saying is that, the banks, like every other parties involved, need to familiarize themselves with, the projects, the risks, and so on. Our view is that at this stage, when you look at gigawatts projects, as much as you can have conversation with banks, it's still a bit early. We're still in a process where we are defining what these projects are going to look like, what sizing, what phasing, who's going to be the off-takers. I think having the right, so as you probably know, our partner in Mauritania is Total Energies. I think one of the big criteria is when you're going to progress these projects in terms of achieving bankability is having the partners that have both the technical capability and the financial capability to deliver these projects. They are, if and we were discussing before you arrived, smaller projects versus bigger ones. But when you look at a gigawatt project, you're looking at a couple of $2 billion minimum. You have to have around the table investors that have a track record in terms of delivering these projects, not only FID, construction, and operations. And I think it's very important that these will be multi-partner consortiums. If you look at, again, a comparison with oil and gas, most of these major projects are always a set of different players. And I think that's what the industry needs to come to. One of the learnings for Chariot, for example, was that we were initially, if I set aside our gas division, we were a renewable player. And these are much simpler projects to deliver on. They're much smaller. And I think one of the learning curves for us and for many players, and CWP is actually like us, he comes from the wind and the solar business, is learning the complexity of the downstream, all the gas aspects, and again, the need of bringing the right partners. And I think, and I'll come back to your question, is I think this will very much help the discussion with the banks.
I'm not sure we've heard of Talus Renewables. They've deployed a small modular green ammonia project, and they have a small off-taker, not a small off-taker, it's a big off-taker because it's the Kenya Nat company. And really speaking to your point that looking at different countries and we'll have different models, the Mauritania projects are really big, the CWP, they're in the gigawatts, and this is a 1 ton per day sort of project. And I really wanted to ask Melissa in terms of then working with governments and managing risk. And really, what are you seeing as some of the experiences that you're having in the space and the risks that are coming up and how we can manage this?
Okay, fantastic. So I'm from Genesis Energy, and Genesis Energy is not an active player in the hydrogen space at the moment. So really, my position is from a contributor to the hydrogen value chain, where we deploy big solar power plants as well as hydro power plants. So as it pertains to challenges that we have experienced in the green hydrogen, I wouldn't be able to answer to that. But I will like to answer your previous question that you asked to Laurent about low-cost financing. And again, it goes back to his point. If we start with gigawatt projects for a technology that has not been proven, the financing is shy. And if the financing is not shy, it's coming at a very high interest rate because there's a lot of risk. So to his point, if we start from the ground up, smaller scale hydrogen projects, prove the concept, have your learnings, and thereafter, I think we'll be able to start to see lower cost financing for this new technology.
Fantastic. I've always heard Siemens, FX, and Panel say that technology is not an issue when it comes to green hydrogen. I should let him know that there are different sentiments to that. And he says what we need is off-takers. That's still it's a big challenge in the space, and we're really working. We coordinate the Africa Green Hydrogen Alliance that you mentioned, and really working with governments to see how we build that partnership to get the projects up and running. Dr. Abbas, in terms of risks, do you see like there are any countries that have started documenting some of these lessons that developers are experiencing in the space, and how we can mitigate this as partnerships? Speaking to what Laurent has said, that it's going to take multiple partners. I think we did a study that shows you need at least 6 minimum partners. So what are some of the lessons that you've picked in the space so far?
Thank you, Joy, for this. In my perspective as a forecaster and a modeler, we do run energy modeling, and we do have a comprehensive understanding of end-to-end implications. One of the major issues we have been talking about here are risk and finance or investment. And one clear thing that we have come to understand is, for you to get finance or investment, you need to secure a contract. You need to get off-taker, and you need to get that off-taker to commit long-term. And that is what de-risk the project, and that's what helps incentivize finance and every other thing you want to do. Now, let us reflect back a bit and understand clearly why there are still some kind of very slow coming forward from companies to be able to uptake hydrogen. And from the technology side, our understanding is a number of companies that typically use natural gas and they want to replace it with hydrogen are looking at a key parameter we call interchangeability. So their ability to disconnect gas supply and replace with hydrogen. And for them to do that, they look at a number of things, one of which is cost. Is hydrogen cost competitive enough to do? Obviously it's going to be in the future, but now it is not. So they look at it, okay, for us to buy hydrogen, even if you take the blue for $1.5, $1.8 per kilogram, and that is nearly equivalent to between 14 to $18 per million BTU. And remember, the typical natural gas prices we do have ranges from 2 in the Henry Hub down to TTF around 9, 12. So that is the first kind of cost parity that the hydrogen require to drive that demand. The second aspect are issues related to doing what it has to do, and that is in terms of the calorific value of hydrogen. So if I'm a hydrogen uptaker, or if I plan to uptake hydrogen, at the moment, because its calorific value is 1/3 of natural gas, I will have to use 3 times hydrogen to do the same work that natural gas could have done for me. So as an uptaker, I look at it. So that simply means the hydrogen cost must fall sharply lower for it to replace the natural gas because of its low calorific value. And another important thing that the investment and de-risking must do are things related to research. And again, that was one of the previous points I'm trying to make, that we really need to understand this hydrogen from a full value chain. At the moment, there are a lot of effort from the, I can say, upstream, meaning in terms of hydrogen production, electrolyzers, many other SMR and other processes. But when it comes to hydrogen pipeline, yeah, we do see some investment coming in terms of retrofitting or building new pipelines to take. But another more important thing we have to do to de-risk hydrogen is to look at the consumer kind of behavior and what will incentivize and make them commit to a long-term contract to obtake hydrogen, and what is actually making them kind of a bit nervous to make that commitment. It's an involvement there could be failures. We will fail, we will fall and rise again. We gradually do. We can see a number of issues that hydrogen has faced in Germany, for example, where the electric train had a problem. But one of the key things, and I always tell people, in our understanding, rapidly developing hydrogen alone could be a challenge, but blending hydrogen with natural gas offer a very good solution for the consumers. So take, for example, you can blend 20% hydrogen with 80% natural gas and use it without almost no changes in your boiler and firing system. But as the proportion continue to rise, you may have some changes which you have to, and these are some of the key things that will de-risk hydrogen, giving it the initial lift to rise, so that once it is capable to compete, you see it growing much more quicker.
Couple of threads that I would love to follow up on what you said in terms of de-risking and also incentives. I'm not so sure if you already covered the IRA and how that has probably affected the hydrogen market in Africa. Maybe we could start from there in terms of what options does Africa have to finance hydrogen projects, considering we will not have subsidies like what the United States is doing, and how also then developers will probably prefer to be in the US than coming to Africa. So it would be good to hear what are some of the financing instruments that Africa can adopt, and thinking in the context of what's happening globally. Okay. And if then also the hydrogen that's produced in Africa is going to be shipped into Europe, there's also considering standards and certifications, and if we blend it with the gas, will it still pass if we are doing, this is about decarbonization. What options are we also looking at there to ensure that then, are we going green? Are we going blue first? Are we getting blue accepted into the market? So I think those two, and I also wanted to hear, I could just ask this to Laurent, about de-risking conversation as well, and looking at DFIs. And I've had a couple of private sector developers saying that they're slowing down projects. Yeah. What would be your take? Should we go fully commercial, private to private, or what do you feel about DFIs as well? So maybe we could start with Laurent, and then Dr. Abbas, come back to you.
I mean, ultimately, if you're a country and you choose to partner with a consortium of private investors, you have to be convinced that they can deliver the project without having access to, financial instruments that are subsidies. Ultimately, subsidies are also provided to off-takers. So, what we see in a lot of cases is we've had initial discussions with off-takers in Europe, and as much as we wouldn't be getting subsidies, they would be getting subsidies to close the gap between what they currently buy and replacing by green hydrogen. So I don't think the IRA or any other subsidy scheme in Japan or elsewhere prevents Africa from targeting, for example, the European market. Yeah. That's one thing. The second thing is, I think we were saying before you arrived that there is a consensus that starting. I think you need to start on a commercial basis, because if you start a project that's not a commercial project, then how do you evolve towards becoming commercial? But there's certainly ways to achieve commercial terms on smaller projects initially, and I think there is value in testing an approach. So typically that's what Chariot is doing in Morocco, for example, with our Moroccan partners. So we're doing 1 megawatt, and the intention is to try and have these proof of concept in as many countries as possible, because then you can have a basis to engage on the regulatory frameworks, you can test technology, you can also test the terms, the commercial terms, especially in countries where you have domestic offtake, which obviously makes it a lot easier than if you have to look at exporting from phase one. So these are all the things that you can start investigating to achieve commercial terms for a project. And not in 2030, but obviously earlier.
Yes, fantastic, yeah. Dr. Abbas.
Okay, Joy, thank you for this. Let me start from the initial point you mentioned in terms of the RIA, looking at how it helped incentivize the kind of the low carbon systems or the hydrogen system. Now, based on the American government policy of 111, that is achieving a hydrogen price, 1 kilogram of hydrogen to be $1 per kilogram by 2030, which is a kind of a very good incentive to help the market and be able to get some long-term commitment. Now, if we look at that, it's a very good and key kind of policy that can help in the US sector. But looking at Africa, we need to do a bit of more collaboration, as Laurent said, looking at try to first of all integrate our market. At the moment, one of the major problems we do have in Africa is infrastructure. You can have a hydrogen producer in Cape Town, and you may have a hydrogen consumer in Johannesburg, for example. How do you get the hydrogen to that consumer? Your options is either you have a hydrogen pipeline, or you liquefy hydrogen. Liquefying hydrogen takes you to minus 253 degrees, just 20 degrees to the lowest point ever, minus 273, which is quite very technologically challenging, but it's not impossible. There are ways we can come up with ways to de-risk those kind of challenges by getting some sort of regional market structure. And one of the key things that I usually propose is getting Africa to be some sort of hydrogen hub, just like the way we have the HERI hub, the TTF, the GECF, which are established markets for natural gas, for example. So if we do have that kind of market structure in Africa, it will help integrate. A producer in Kenya will be able to sell to a consumer in Johannesburg, or vice versa, and that will help the kind of the financing to flow, and will be able to de-risk the processes. And that is why it's a bit much more difficult for market to pick up if the infrastructures are not properly connected, and especially if there are cost differentials. If it is more expensive to sell hydrogen in Cape Town, but if you go to nearest country, you can get it cheaper. So it can cause some minor issues, but again, it's a learning point. We will rise and fall, but we will be able to get there one day.
I really like the conversation about regional markets, and it's really good to see that Namibia and South Africa are already working on that kind of partnership, even when it comes to shared infrastructure. If you have an electrolyzer plant that sits in Namibia that South Africa can use, and it's really good to see that new market opportunities that is really opening up for Africa. So I also just wanted to check in the audience if you have any questions for the panelists, and if we have a roaming mic for that. As we're looking at that, I could just ask Melissa one question about markets again. And the conversation has quite focused on export. How do you think we can then really make the African markets work? And what opportunities do you see when it comes to hydrogen and renewables?
Sorry, if you can come again, what was the question?
Markets. So as we develop then the projects for export, which again, conversations are already going about Europe, Japan, and Korea buying the hydrogen that's produced in Africa, how about the domestic markets? How do we ensure this develops so that then also Africa is growing its own industries?
Well, I think we need to actually start with the domestic market before we even go into exporting. Africa has been notorious to, you've got the resources within Africa, but we're quick to export that out. We mine lithium, we're quick to export lithium out, to then buy lithium batteries from China back into Africa. It's the same thing with hydrogen. If we're not careful, we'll end up exporting all of the hydrogen out and then end up rebuying hydrogen supplied goods from the West. So I think as it pertains to African domestic use, that's where we should actually start. We've got a lot of operations that need hydrogen. We were just also at the Green Hydrogen Summit, and they just announced a partnership with Anglo, BMW, and Sasol. And it's things like the Anglos who need green hydrogen for domestic use. It's things like the BMWs who are in country who need the hydrogen for domestic use. So I think if the focus, and again, if we start from a ground up, if the focus is on the domestic market, we get those projects right, we're then equipped to be able to be mass exporters out.
Focus on domestic markets first. Incredible way to end. I've been signaled that we are actually out of time. So I will just ask us to give a lot of applause to the panelists for the great contribution.